Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Frederik from Quamotion, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, Speed Up Your Mobile Testing. And I'm happy to be joined by Eleanor from Genymotion today. Genymotion is a very popular Android emulator, and which is also available in the cloud. We've announced a partnership with Genymotion a couple of months ago, meaning that you now can also use Genymotion virtual devices when you automate your test using the Quamotion software. So I'm very happy to have Eleanor on the call as well. So hi, Eleanor.
Hi, Frederick. So thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. So I'm really pleased to do this webinar with Frederick because we've been working really closely together for a few months to really do the integration of our Genymotion Cloud virtual devices within Quamotion Cloud.
Yep, thank you. So let's start. By looking at the agenda first. So we've already introduced Genymotion and Quamotion, so we can tick that box. And next in the webinar, we'll first talk a bit about why you want to test on mobile and on why testing on mobile is becoming more and more important. Then we'll talk a bit about how you can actually go about and build and implement a mobile test automation strategy. We have lots of experience working with customers doing different projects related to mobile test automation. So we're very happy that we can share some of that knowledge that we've gained during this webinar. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll also do a hands-on demo where we will show how you can actually implement a mobile test automation strategy. And in the demo, we'll start with writing a very simple automated test for an application. Then what we'll do next is we'll run the tests locally using Quamotion and a Genymotion device. Then I'll upload those tests to the Quamotion cloud so I can run those tests on lots of different devices. And we'll end the demo with showing how you can integrate this with continuous integration platforms such as Bitrise as well. And after the demo, there will be some time left for questions and answers. If any of you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the GoToWebinar interface. You can write questions there in the chat box. We'll consolidate those questions and then we'll repeat them and answer them at the end of the webinar. Okay, so why do you want to test on mobile in the first place? I think what we're seeing is that users are becoming increasingly mobile. And for example, last year, more than half of all internet traffic came from mobile devices. And almost 6 out of 10 users are consuming digital content through mobile applications. This means that the users of your service, your website, your application, are also very likely to use mobile devices to access your service. And for many industries, what this means is that mobile applications are becoming the product. For example, many of us are now mainly interacting with banks using mobile banking applications. So if we think banks today, we probably think mobile banking apps as well. However, there are still a lot of issues with mobile applications. On this slide, we've listed the most common issues with those applications. For example, there's still a lot of applications that simply do not start on the device of some users, or there are applications that don't work as expected, that are slow, or that just crash when using those applications. And these issues all cause frustration, bad reviews, damage to the reputation of your brand, and eventually it means that the users will delete your mobile application and download a competing app from the App Store. And that actually means that you've just lost all the revenue related to that user. And for Android devices in particular, a lot of issues are related to device fragmentation. There are a lot of different versions of Androids and there are lots of different device configurations, and you need to make sure that your application works correctly on all of them. For example, what we've seen in the past is we had a customer which had an application and they were getting bad reviews on the Google Play Store because some of the users reported a white screen where the application when they launched the application. And actually, that customer was unable to reproduce that problem, so they were not able to answer or to help those customers. And at the end, they came to us and they were able to test their application on lots of different devices. And what we found out is that when they were using a specific version of the Google SDK on a specific device, then that problem would appear. So in the end, they've been able to resolve it and to increase the average scores on the application store. So in a nutshell, the only way to ensure you have sufficient test coverage of your Android application is through test automation and by automatically testing your application on lots of different devices. The team here at Quamotion has lots of experience with testing mobile applications. Working with our customers, we've been able to digest a couple of best practices, which we believe help our customers be successful with automated testing. And actually, we think a very important aspect of test automation is making sure your tests are what we call part of the process and stable. To make sure your tests are part of the process, you can start with automating tests and testing as early as possible, and making sure that when a test fails, your CI system and your CI builds fail as well. We've often seen that customers don't run automated tests as part of their CI process because the tests are unstable or flaky. And that's why it's really important that you have zero tolerance on flakiness. You really need to make sure that your tests run across all devices all the time, or otherwise you don't integrate them in your CI process. But it also means that if you have some tests which are flaky and which are unstable, and if you don't integrate them in your CI process, you get very little value from your tests because you're not using your tests, your automated tests to test changes to your application all the time. And you've made an investment in the scripting, but you're not getting any results because you're not actually running your tests as part of your CI process. So there, making sure that when you write an automated test, spend some time and effort making sure that test is stable and it runs on all different devices, and then integrate it in your CI process as soon as possible. And that way you're really sure that your automation effort will pay off and that you'll get warnings or alerts when developers break something by accident and your application starts failing on some devices. When you start with testing, it's also important that you take some time to think about what you want to test first. We find that the no risk, no test motto is a very good one. So what that means in practice is that you probably want to start in areas which are likely to break, which are sensitive to changes, and then you can move on to more stable areas. And finally, when you're automating your tests, also keep in mind that your non-functional requirements, such as performance, the time it takes to launch your application, how responsive your application is, can also be as important as your normal functional requirements. So here again, what we've seen is that performance of applications sometimes really impacts how users perceive applications, and sometimes they even report an application as broken because it's slow. And again, the devices can have a very large impact on the performance of your applications. So really make sure that when you test your applications, that you test for those non-functional aspects as well, and that you choose your device models in function of that as well. Maybe test on some older devices or some low-end devices to make sure that you capture those non-functional requirements in your automated testing as well. And then I think if you have to decide where you need to spend or where you need to invest in testing, in the manual testing world, sorry, in the desktop testing world, we came up with this paradigm called the testing pyramid, where we say that, okay, you start with a very broad layer of unit tests. You have lots of tests which test individual components or unitary components of your application. That's something that you definitely need to keep doing when you move to mobile. You have the service tests, where you have rather high-level tests of individual services or individual components of your application. That's something that we can keep doing as well. And then on desktop, UI testing was typically a smaller effort. You had a couple of high-level tests that you execute now and then, and that do an end-to-end test of your application. And again, on mobile, you can also, it's okay to have a couple of high-level tests, a couple of UI tests, but because of the device fragmentation, it's really important that you execute those UI tests on lots of different devices, that you continuously keep testing and keep executing those tests on different devices, so that when you introduce compatibility problems in your application, you get that feedback as soon as possible. With Quamotion, we support testing on both physical devices as well as emulators, such as the Genymotion emulator. And there's lots of trade-offs in choosing which device you want to test on. And actually, Eleanor will take over the presentation from here, and we will now see why adopting a hybrid strategy is a recommended approach for automated testing. So Eleanor, happy to hand over to you. And I'll unmute you as well.
Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay.
So here we'll see why it is important to have a hybrid strategy, because we think that testing on both virtual and physical devices is really valuable, and they complement each other. So that's why we decided to partner with Quamotion, who at first only had physical devices on the cloud. So what we see is that testing on virtual devices can be faster and cost less because of its scalability. Because sometimes when you want to test on physical devices on the forum, you have to wait for the device availability. With virtual devices, it is more scalable, so you can start the number of virtual devices you want at the same time. But there could be some drawbacks because you don't really know how your application performs on real end user devices, because you know that on real devices you get a manufacturer's OS customization layer. So that's why it is also important to test on physical devices for this matter, and also for the hardware that can be tested on virtual devices, for example, the Bluetooth connection. So you're probably asking yourselves, how do I know when to test on virtual or physical devices during the application development lifecycle? So what we would recommend for a hybrid strategy is to use virtual devices to smoke test your latest app builds in your continuous integration process during feature development. And indeed, yes, those tests don't really rely on the manufacturer OS custom layer. And on the other hand, use physical devices to test your application on actual devices once per day or before you release your app to the App Store. So now that you've learned that adopting a hybrid strategy is recommended for testing your application, it is also important to know that your test must run in a continuous integration process for several reasons. So if you are already into automating your tests, Quamotion solution will be able to help you fully automate your tests through easy automated test creations and plugins to easily connect to Quamotion solutions from a CI server and run those tests on either Genymotion virtual devices or physical devices. You will see that with Frederick's demonstration, there will be no manual steps required to run those tests. You will just need to run your CI job and your test will run. And this is having your test automating through CI, continuous integration process, is really important to avoid flaky tests, because you can't avoid test failing due to unexpected behavior, for example, network disconnection, server unavailability. So the most important step is to be able to identify real test fails due to an application bug. So what we recommend that adopting a retry failure test implementation is also really important. And this can be easily done with fully automated tests within a CI process. So your test will benefit from this automation and your results will be more valuable. So as said in previous slides, we need to keep the feedback loop short by adopting a hybrid strategy. So here, I think it is a good way to do a quick recap on how the continuous integration workflow works. So this slide may be familiar for those who are already familiar with continuous integration, but here we will see where Quamotion is into all these steps of the continuous integration workflow. So in the meantime, you can have some QA testers who will create the test on Quamotion and maybe run those tests after. But what we'll see is that how it works, that you have different steps within the continuous integration workflow. You have the developers, they are building the application, they are coding. When they are finished building a feature, they just do a PR, so a pull request, so that we have like a source control server, such as GitHub, that will check in for changes for each PR. Then the CI server, such as Jenkins, Bamboo, or here Bitrise with the demo, it will fetch the changes of the code. It will build the application, and those then tests that have been created will be tested on the Quamotion cloud on Genymotion virtual devices or on physical devices. And after, when all these tests are finished, it will just trigger it if those tests failed or were successful. So now let's see a demo from Frederick, how to use Quamotion Cloud in a continuous integration workflow.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Eleanor, for this overview about how you can use CI to speed up mobile testing as well. So I'll end the webinar with a quick demo where we'll give you a hands-on demonstration of how you can automate your mobile testing. And what I'll show first is a quick sample of how you can create a automated mobile test case. So we start with an existing test plan, maybe that has been written down or created manually. Then I'll automate that using a scripting language. Next, I'll run that test locally on my local computer here at my desk, and then I'll upload it to the Quamotion cloud, and I'll run those tests on devices hosted in Genymotion cloud. So I'll run the test on Android emulators powered by Genymotion. And then finally, I'll end the demonstration with an example of how you can use that in a CI, in a continuous integration workflow as well. And I'll do that using the Bitrise CI environment. So what I'll show you first is what we call the Quamotion web driver. It's the software that you can install locally on your computer, and which we use to automate mobile applications. So I've presented the interface. It's a web-based interface on my desktop. And in this interface, I can first manage applications. So typically you get applications such as APK packages or IPA files from your development team. You can just upload them to the Quamotion interface. And once you've uploaded them, you're able to use those tests or those applications in your automated tests. You don't need to make any changes to the application. You don't need special builds from your developer. It's just a vanilla APK or IPA files that the developers give to you. There's also the devices tab in which you can manage all the devices which are connected locally to your computer. In this case, what I did is I created a virtual device in Genymotion Cloud using the bridge tool or the connector tool. I connected to that device running in the Genymotion Cloud from my local PC. And then finally, there's what we call the spy functionality, which is an interface which allows you to inspect the user interface of your application and start writing test automation scripts. So what I'll do is I've just opened the spy. I selected the application I want to test, the Acquaint application, and I created a new session. And what this application is about, the Acquaint application, it's kind of a contact list application. So I have lots of different people in my contact list as acquaintances, and I can edit information, I can search for individual contacts, and perform other actions on those contacts. So let's say the first contact I have on my list, Armstead 2. He is an acquaintance of mine, but I want to view some of his details and edit his contact details. So let's imagine I want to automate that scenario. What I can do with the spy is I can click on his name. And what the tool will do for you is we will identify that element in the user interface hierarchy of that application. And now can start adding actions which execute a command on that element. So let's say I want to add a click element action. So I'll choose click element and hit add. And at this point in time, I have a script which will try to click on that element. And I can immediately execute that action to make sure that my action or that my command is correctly. So if I hit the execute button, what will happen is I will simulate a click on that button, and then the application moves to the next screen. What I want to do in my scenario next is to edit the contact details of Mr. Armstead. So I want to click on the edit button. So there's the same workflow. I select the edit button by clicking on it in the spy. I use the code generator to add a new command which executes or which clicks on that button. So I hit add. And if I want to test and make sure that my application is working correctly, I can click on the execute button to execute that individual command. And then we'll continue there. And let's say I want to change his name. I can check the name field here. So I've identified that in my spy operation. And again, I can execute a command such as clear text. I can add that to my list of commands. I can hit the execute button. And what we'll do next is we'll clear the name, or we'll clear the text field of that person. Once I've created or once I've defined my my script in the code generator, I can actually use this to generate code for this very basic script, and I can do that in different languages. So I can add a language. I can create my script in PowerShell, a language such as C# or Java. Or JSON if I want to export this to another environment. So let's say I want to do it in PowerShell, and then we've actually generated a code for you that you can copy and paste to a script editor, to a PowerShell script editor, and from there you can then run a very basic script which would execute those three actions. If I were to do it in Java, for example, my test would look like this. Let's imagine I now want to execute this this test on a couple of on my local device. What I can do is I can open the PowerShell editor. So let me pop that up on my screen. And I can navigate to the folder in which I stored my script, which is on the desktop, and then in a folder called Webinar. And here I have a script called Genymotion test, which contains the same scenario. And I'll execute that and also give you a copy of the device screen so you can see the script executing on the actual device. So let me put that here. Let me click on Genymotion test. And what will happen now is the same workflow will execute. So we'll first install the application on the device. We'll start the application running on the device. So there you'll see the current application popping up in a couple of moments. There it is. And then once the application executes, we need to enter a passphrase. So we are going to type Genymotion in the passphrase field, hit the continue button. Then the script is going to wait for the next screen to appear. So the screen with all the contacts or with all the acquaintances is going to select the Mr. Armstead contact. It's going to click on that, going to go to the edit screen. And once we've done that, the test scenario will complete and will automatically close the application. So right now, I think we're sending the click command to go to the contact details for Mr. Armstead. Then we'll click on the edit button to open the contact details. And this is where this basic script stops at this point in time. So we're going to stop the application and the device is probably going to return back to the home screen. So this was a very basic scenario which I created using the SPY, and then I executed it locally. And every time you execute a script, we actually keep track of the results in our dashboard. So you can see in this setup, I ran tests on 2 different devices, and I ran 14 tests in total. Actually, a lot of the tests were failing. I can see the individual results. So let's take the latest test that I was executing. And then for every step that I added to my script, for example, launching the application, entering the passphrase, you'll see a quick description of what was being executed on the device, an indication about whether that step was successful or not. So here you have a very simple test log, which you can also use when a test has failed, for example, to determine why your test is passing or failing. So this was writing an automation script locally using a Genymotion device. Let's say that as a next step, I really want to execute this test on lots of different devices using the Quamotion cloud. What I can do there is I can log into the Quamotion cloud environment, which is that cloud.quamotion.mobi. So let me go there. And in my cloud environment, I can create multiple projects. I have created a project for this webinar, for the Genymotion webinar, and the Quamotion cloud interface will probably look familiar to you. Here also you have the same concepts. I can manage applications, so I've uploaded the Acquaint application. I have one version of the Acquaint application right now, but I could manage different versions if the development team gives me different versions. And I can also upload my test packages. So a test package can be a script, or it can be a Java or a Maven package as well. And in any of those packages, I can just upload them to the Quamotion cloud, and then I can start executing those tests on different devices. So if I want to run a test, I can go to the Run tab, and then I can hit the New button. And here I can specify which application I want to test. So let me select the Acquaint application. I can choose which test package or which test I want to execute. So let's execute version 1 of the Genymotion test. And then I can select the device group on which I want to run all my different tests. And this is a device group is just a set of devices on which we will run those tests. So for example, we have a device group for top 10 and top 25 devices. The top 10 devices group, for example, contains on different versions of Android, the Google Nexus, emulators of the Google Nexus device, and the top 20 device group is a bit more broad than that. I can also select an individual device, and I can also select physical devices if I want to do that. I can also create my own device groups. Typically, what we see is that most of our customers they have preferences for devices on which they want to test based on maybe usage statistics. They know they want to test on Samsung devices, or they want to do the Huawei devices. And you can also customize those device groups in the Quamotion cloud. You can select or you can choose which devices you want to test on in your project. Then I can actually start this test, so I can hit the start button. And what we'll do now is we'll schedule this test on 10 different Genymotion devices. So at this point in time, what you see there are 10 test runs which are in the pending state. So we're waiting for those runs to to start. So let me open the details of one of those runs. And you see at this point in time, for example, what we're doing is we're renting the Genymotion device. So that's a new emulator that's starting in the Genymotion cloud. We're creating it. We're waiting it for that emulator to start. And then once the device is available and once the device has booted, we'll actually go and install the application on the device and run the tests. So I'll let those tests run for a while. I've kicked off the tests now. So I'll take the advantage of the time that we have to wait for those tests to finish. I'll use that time to go to the Bitrise environment and also show how you can actually integrate this with the CI environment. So Bitrise is one of the CI environments out there. Jenkins is another one. Or TeamCity is yet another one. And we have integration with most CI environments that are available on the market today. And what that means is that in my CI workflow, I can add a new step, which means that which indicates that we're going to execute the test on the Quamotion cloud. So for example, here I have a workflow for testing the Acquaint application. And if I open the workflow editor for this application, what you'll see is that there's a step in the workflow called Run Quamotion Tests. And in this step, I can basically specify which test package I want to run, which version of the test package I want to execute, on which devices and on which device group I want to run those tests. So here you have all the different device groups, for example, which are available in the Quamotion cloud. So we have other steps as well. For example, we have steps which allow you to upload the latest version of your application, such as the APK file or the IPA file to the Quamotion cloud. You can also automatically upload your test package. Sometimes the test packages live in the same repository as the code, as your application, the code for your application. So you can just build the latest version of your test scripts. You can build the latest version of your application, send it all to the Quamotion cloud, trigger a new run, and then you'll get the results in the Bitrise CI as well. So I'll take some time to demonstrate what that looks like. So this is a run of that application, and you have the workflow which is starting. So first, you have the standard Bitrise workflow where it's going to check out my repository. And then we have the Run Quamotion tests step, which kicks in. So at this point in time, we'll log into the cloud, we'll schedule a test run, and then we'll wait for the test run to start. And as soon as the test run has started, you'll get the actual output of that test run in the Bitrise CI console as well. So you have one single location where you can see all the different actions that were executed to run your test. So this time, in this case, for example, the test was packaged as a Maven script. So you first have the Maven initialization which runs, and then we had a Cucumber test which was using Quamotion to automate tests on a mobile device. And you can see the different actions which were being executed as part of those tests. We had all the different scenarios which were executing. Some of the scenarios were failing, as you can see here. So I had 6 steps where 2 failed, 1 was skipped, and 3 passed. And based on that, my CI build here in Bitrise actually failed because some of the steps in my test were also failing. So if I go back to the Quamotion cloud, I have my test which I scheduled before I went to the Bitrise environment, which is a bit further along right now. So we actually started the Quamotion WebDrivers, which is the automation tool. We downloaded the test application, we installed it on the application on the device itself, and then we had the test which was executing. In this case, as you can see, there's actually a problem with the test. It failed. So if I go back to my overview of tests, you also see that test being marked as failed. But I have my 10 tests which were running on the 10 different Android devices. So some of them succeeded. There was a failure on a couple of them. So right now I can go back to those tests, analyze the logs, and find out why my test was failing on that device. So in a nutshell, during this demo, what I tried to demonstrate to you was first how you can automate and how you can create a mobile test. So I used the local Quamotion interface for that. So I used the spy functionality to create a test script. Then I used PowerShell to run that test locally on my local PC. And then finally, I uploaded my test script and my application to the Quamotion cloud. And then I used the Quamotion cloud to trigger a run of my test on 10 different devices. And the test actually passed and failed, passed on some devices and failed on some devices. So I would need to go back and analyze why there are still some compatibility issues with my application. And then we also showed how you can integrate this in the CI so that every time there's a new CI build being triggered, how you can automatically test the latest version of your application on different devices, both physical devices as well as Genymotion emulators, and get the results back into your CI build and have your CI build passed or failed based on the output of the automated test. So in summary, I think what we try to do is we try to highlight or demonstrate the advantages of implementing a hybrid automated test strategy. We think there are a couple of advantages related to using a hybrid strategy, and hybrid in the sense of using both emulators as well as physical devices. One of the real advantages with emulators is that you can increase the coverage. You can have a broader device coverage. The people at Genymotion are really good at making sure that there are emulators for different versions of Android. They also keep up to date with the latest version of Android. So you have a broad device coverage. Emulators are typically also faster, so you get better speed, you get better performance. You can speed up the time it takes to test your application on different platforms thanks to the virtual devices. And in the end, what this gives you is also high scalability. With just one click of the button, you can choose to run your tests on, for example, 10 or 25 different Genymotion emulators. So it really gives you a high scalability in terms of configurations on which you want to test. And because those devices are virtual devices, you can also have multiple jobs, multiple CI jobs running in parallel, and they'll all have their own dedicated virtual device. So there's no risk that one device is locked by one run and the other one cannot access it. In general, one of the advantages with automation is also the accuracy. Because you automate your scripts, your tests will be more accurate. The results are reproducible. So if a test fails, you have a full log detailing what happened on the device and why the test passed or failed. So it's also actionable for the development team. And in general, what we find is that with automation, you also reduce the human-induced bugs. Manual testers, sometimes they slack off or they're a bit less focused and they don't catch all the bugs. Whereas, of course, the automation scripts always run at 100% of attention. So they will always detect if something goes wrong. If anything goes wrong, they'll just throw their hands up in the air and say like, hey, this doesn't work. So you know that's something that you need to fix in your application. It's also an agile method. because you can do both coding and testing in parallel or at the same time. Every time there's a new change, it automatically gets tested on lots of different devices. So it really allows you to be agile and to do iterative development there. And it also enables easy refactoring because you can make a change, or a developer can make a change local to a local change to the application. He can test it on the devices or the applications that he has locally. And then whenever he does a check-in, the CI system will automatically make sure that that change actually works on all the different devices that you care about. And then if maybe you induce a new problem, such as a widescreen problem that we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there will be automatically an alert with details about which device failed and why it failed, so that the developer can go back and check why that failed and what he can do to fix that problem. So in a nutshell, this is what we wanted to highlight or demonstrate to you today. We will also follow up either tomorrow or early next week with the slides and a recording of this webinar. So if you want to review the content at your own pace at a later time, you'll definitely be able to do that. And if you have any questions, or if you're interested in setting up a mobile testing framework or mobile testing strategy in your own company, then please feel free to reach out to both Eleanor or myself. We've listed our email addresses on this slide. So you can always come back to us, contact us, and we'll be more than happy to assist you and see how mobile test automation and how a hybrid testing strategy can be relevant or can be of benefit to you and your organization. We're more than happy to take answers as well. So if you have any questions, we're more than happy to take questions as well and answer them. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box in the GoToWebinar interface, and then we'll be happy to answer them as well. So I think that's it from my side. I think my colleagues over at the Genymotion team, they'll try to consolidate the questions, repeat them over audio, and then we'll try to answer them. And this is just a reminder to Aude and Eleanor that you're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, we're still waiting for some questions, if there are any.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to put them in the chat box.
Yeah. If not, it means that we did a good job, Eleanor, and that we explained everything crystal clear.
Let's just wait for 1-2 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, you have like a question from Mimit Grover. So hi, Frederick. What's your take on scalability testing of Android apps?
So I think you probably need to help me understand your question, what you exactly mean by scalability. So do you want to test how your backend system scale if more users are connecting your mobile applications, or do you just, yeah, okay, that's right. So I think we actually had a discussion about this a couple of months ago at the Mobile World Congress, and maybe the team from Genymotion can also chime in here. But what we see is that if you want to test how your application scales and how your backend system scales, when the popularity of your application increases, so when you have more users connected to your application, I think the first thing you want to do is really do the standard performance testing of your backend. So if your backend system is running REST APIs, then there are a couple of tools out there in the market which you can use to really stress test and load test your backend. For example, one of the tools you could use is JMeter. And what you can do at the same time is have a couple of tests running on physical devices or on emulators, where you measure the impact of the load on your servers increasing on a mobile application. So, for example, let's say that I have Gmeter and I define I don't know, 2,000 virtual users hitting my backend systems. At the same time, I can also use a couple of emulators or a couple of physical devices. I execute my same test scenarios on those devices, and I see what the impact of the performance of those scenarios is on the actual user experience that users will see when they are using that application on my mobile device. We know that some people want to generate all of the load using virtual, using devices. So I guess with, for example, with the Genymotion cloud, you could also spin up maybe 1,000 emulators and use test automation to automate users interacting on 1,000 emulators and have those 1,000 emulators hit your backend systems. That's something that you can do as well. But probably having a hybrid approach as well with load generation tools such as Gmeter, and then measuring the impact of that on a couple of devices. That's the strategy that we usually recommend. So I don't know if the team at Genymotion has something to add to that, and I also don't know, Nimit, if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add on what you said, Frederick.
Yeah. So do we support Genymotion? Yeah.
Yeah, does Quamotion support Genymotion on AWS? Yeah, what the devices that are connected to Quamotion Cloud are, I don't know if you're aware that on Genymotion you have two kind of cloud products. We have one which is hosted by us, which this is the one that is integrated within Quamotion. So regarding you could be limited into the number of virtual devices that you want to start at the same time. And as your question about AWS is quite relevant because with Genymotion on AWS, you can really, what we say, we're talking about scalability. You can really do like load testing about it with Genymotion and AWS. But this is something we need to discuss about with Quamotion and see if it could be the other approach, where if you have users that want to start, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of devices at the same time and do load testing or want to scale their apps, maybe this is an option that we would support. And I don't know if you're aware about this. We also have Genymotion on other third-party providers, such as Google Cloud Platform, and we definitely will talk about it with Frederick about a possible integration to address this kind of usage.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, Eleanor, what you can do with the AWS and the Google Cloud integration with Genymotion is I can go to AWS. I can say, okay, I want to have 1,000 or 10,000 Android virtual devices. And then using the AWS interface, I can just get all those. I can get 10,000 Android emulators in a couple of minutes. Is that how it works?
Yeah, well, this is something with some APIs that you could integrate with Quamotion, but let's talk about this after the webinar.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah, okay. No, but this is what, so the Genymotion, the Quamotion integration, I think as soon as we have ADB connectivity, it would be okay, but it's not something that we have off the shelf today, but we can always discuss it if there's the specific need. Yep, sure.
I think we're kind of over with the questions. I don't see any more else. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope that it helped you. I will let Frederick close the webinar.
Yep. So again, thank you for attending. Thanks for the questions as well. And if there's anyone, if you want to follow up, if you have further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Eleanor or myself. And we'll be in touch with you anyway the coming days with the slides and the recording. So if you have questions, you know where to find us. Okay. Thank you, and have a nice evening as well. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.